Where ordinary people washed while traveling. You start the day with road grit in your eyebrows and ambition in your pockets, which is to say, lint. The sunrise steeps the hedgerows in weak tea, and you follow the oldest sign in the world, sound. Water talks before it shows itself. It chuckles through willow roots, claps over stones and hushes down to a secret when it slides under a plank bridge. You kneel where the bank shelves low, brace your soles in the mud, and cup the cold. It bites first, then forgives. You splash your face, and the road loosens its shoulders by a tiny civilized degree. Your breath fogs, your skin wakes, and your spine holds a meeting and votes to continue. The stream keeps a pebbled bar where other travelers have taught it manners. A flat stone holds soap like a guest of honor. Soft, plain, a little harsh, the kind cooked from ash lye and rendered fat in somebody's backyard. You palm the cake, sniff it, and smile at the note of last night's fire. A rag hangs from a thorn, communal, unofficial, not endorsed by any guild of hygiene, but there anyway, a kindness that assumes strangers behave like cousins. You dampen your travel cloth, the one that is towel, scarf, bandana, and occasionally treaty flag, and you wring it until the droplets talk in punctuation. You practice the efficient art of field washing. Feet first, because they vote most, then wrists because they speak for you, then the triangle of forehead, nose and chin that carries your expressions like weather. You lean forward and try to find yourself in the ripples. A frog interrupts with the confidence of a landlord, and you concede the mirror. Light joke 1. You apologize to the frog for lowering the property values. It blinks approval. You fold the damp into cool places, behind the ears, the hinge of the jaw, and feel the day unknot. Rinsed, not reinvented. Clean enough to be polite to bread. By mid-morning the road fattens into ruts, then stones, then the soft triangle of a gate, and the comfortable bureaucracy of a town that has opinions about where water should be met. You tuck the respectful eddy behind your ear like a sprig, and follow the flow of people toward the sound of splash and the smell that is not quite river, not quite kitchen, mineral, mossy, a little civic. Fountains are the town's heartbeat, and you listen for it the way you listened earlier for the shallows under Willow, not only where water is, but who it belongs to, and what it expects of you. There's a stone column in the square with spouts shaped like bronze geese. Actual geese supervise from a strategic distance, unionized as always. A line coils under the shade, buckets at ankles like obedient dogs. You decode before you act. A chipped carving shows a pitcher, drinking water. Yes. A scratched out shirt, laundry, not here. An arrow toward a side lane, washing place 2 streets down, please and thank you. You take your turn, palms first. The way you would adore you hope opens quietly. Nobody lingers at the spout. The rule is swift courtesy. You wet the travel cloth, and wipe the dust's punctuation marks from your temples. One of the geese honks as if to mark your progress on an invisible chart. Mainstream historical fact settles on the edge of the basin like a sunbather. Across much of medieval and early modern Europe, towns built conduits to bring cleaner spring water into public fountains. The point wasn't luxury, but survival. Firefighting, brewing, and daily drinking all needed a source less argumentative than the nearest ditch. Quirky tidbit wanders up with a grin. Some fountains wore little bronze faces that spouted from pursed lips or lion muzzles, and children learned the dangerous sport of how close can I put my face to the scary mouth. As if it were a civic right. Historians still argue whether the presence of a beautiful fountain actually improved personal hygiene, or merely improved civic pride. Did people wash more because water was available, or because the statue scowled at them until they behaved? Down the lane, the washing place announces itself with a festival of slaps and a bloom of suds. A trough runs the length of a wall, fed by the same spring but liberated from the statue's opinionated goose. Here aprons billow and shirts lie like surrendered flags. You learn the choreography fast. Keep your elbows in, leave room for the woman who beats cloth with a paddle, as if conducting a parade. Don't let your belt go downstream, and never ever stand down current of someone intent on convincing a shirt to confess. You rent a square foot of edge with a smile and a copper. The water is colder here. The jokes are warmer. A girl demonstrates the proper wrist flick that turns rinse water into a tiny rainbow and earns a round of applause from nobody in particular. Not everything in town is a scene for everyone. There are bathhouses, there are alleys with doors that refuse to explain themselves, and then there is the human right called a friend of a friend. You follow a tip to an inn with a backyard that believes in privacy, high fence, a scatter of iron hoops, and a wooden tub that has heard more confessions than a parish priest. The landlord, who has the dignity of a person who can lift a cask like a toddler, sets terms with the elegant arithmetic of someone who owns both a key and a mop, a bucket fee, a heat fee, a try not to drown, fee that is mostly theatrical. You pay, because the promise of hot water makes your bones do tiny desperate claps. The water arrives like a slow miracle. Steam writes cursive in the shade. You step in and become the morning's best idea. The wooden staves creak but hold. The world drops to the diameter of a tub and the temperature of mercy. You soak until your thoughts loosen their belts. You scrub with the grain of the wood so it gives nothing back but patience. You even perform the advanced maneuver of getting your hair wet without drinking half the bath, a feat deserving a diploma. The inn dog comes to audit your form and accepts your technique with an approving sneeze. The tub is not a private lake, it's a negotiating table with water. When your time is up, you stand carefully, let the world climb back onto your shoulders, and watch the staff carry the used water to the kitchen garden. Light joke 2. You salute the cabbages, and tell them to expect notes of traveler with a finish of rosemary. They bow in the breeze. The landlord, seeing you clean and therefore able to appreciate flavor, recommends stew. Your stomach agrees with a noise that translates loosely as policy alignment. You eat, and for a brief shining moment you are a citizen of the realm of satiated and respectably clean. You overhear bathhouse talk in the common room, steam rooms, back scrubbing acquaintanceship, wine in wooden cups, songs you haven't learned. You know the reputation in some cities, bathing and brothels blurred. In others, bathhouses were simply the hot pulse of a neighborhood, with heated benches and a polite librarian, of a person who rationed buckets like a conductor controls tempo. Mainstream fact adjusts its spectacles. London kept stews in Southwark for centuries, with rules that opened and closed in rhythm with moral panics and municipal needs. Quirky tidbit. Bath attendants kept long-handled ladles that could deliver either water or justice depending on who splashed whom. Historians still argue whether the stew houses were primarily bathing businesses with an extracurricular sideline, or primarily brothels with a token towel budget. Afternoon turns to that high gold that makes even brick look musical. You step back onto the road, cleaner and a little less terminally ambitious, and the sky does you a favor. It rains. Not the theatrical kind with drum rolls. Just a steady civic drizzle. You tilt your head, and let the drops tap a rhythm on your scalp. You loosen your shirt lacings so the water can do its work. You walk until your edges blur into hedgerow, and every smell around you goes green, crushed nettle, leaf loam, the honest grammar of wet earth. There are techniques for this. You know the trick of oiling leather, the thin smear across your boots that persuades water to mind its manners. You carry a pinch of salt to rub into your armpits when the road has been cruel, and you would prefer not to smell like a heroic goat. You use vinegar on a rag as a quick disinfectant, wincing because vinegar is a poet of honesty. You tuck a little linen bag of dried mint and lavender into your collar like a talisman. If it cannot change what you are, it can at least revise the footnotes. Light joke 3. You call the rain your portable bath subscription. No contract, unlimited splashes, occasional lightning clause. Evening reminds you that cleanliness is not a single achievement, but an ongoing debate between your intentions and the world's enthusiasm. You arrive at a wayside shrine with a stone trough full of rainwater and leaf float. You set your pack down and perform the pleasant audit of small belongings: comb, needle, thread, a sliver of soap wrapped in waxed cloth, the travel cloth airing on a bush like a flag of truce. You sit and do the business of hair, untangle, comb, mutter forgiveness, at the part that refuses to be reasonable. The trough water tastes of stone and sky, and one committed mosquito you do not invite to stay. You think about baths that live in other worlds. The Romans loved the strigil, scrape first, soak later, and sometimes you see a metal one hanging from a traveler's belt, an heirloom that has outlived owners and their opinions. You try the wooden version, a smooth stick, a brisk draw along the forearm, the day lifting off like old wallpaper. There's comfort in learning that your body is partly instrument and partly account book, and both need balancing. You pull your shirt back on, and it sits differently, less argument, more agreement. Mainstream historical fact returns with a towel over its arm across the Islamic world. Public Hammonds offered sequences of hot, warm and cool rooms with scrubbing and massage. Travelers moved through them like coins being reminted, coming out bright again. Those networks touched Europe's ports and border towns, carrying technique and a culture of bathing even when northern places frowned at mixed tubs. Quirky tidbit brings a prop. Some attendants used bundles of fragrant twigs as scrubbers. You can be polished like an apple, and come out smelling like a well-behaved garden. Historians still argue whether travelers returning from pilgrimages brought home new habits of washing, or merely new stories about steamy rooms that made their neighbors suspicious of both hygiene and enthusiasm. Night finds you in a barn loft, because every long day needs a punctuation mark made of hay. Clean feels different against straw. You slide into it and the stalks register fewer complaints. Your cloak becomes a blanket with a surprisingly progressive tax policy on drafts. The animal heat below moves like a lake under ice. You breathe the faint silage of rosemary and admit you are the sort of person who would write home about a good tub. There is a new blister on your heel and a satisfaction wrapped around it like a friend. You drink a careful cup of water and feel the road's arguments soften to a purr. Morning again, and the road's sense of humor is due. The grass conducts 1,000 tiny baptisms across your shins. You accept the blessing, and then perform the quick thief's bath. Wet palm across eyelids, neck, wrists, a fresh shirt aired on a branch overnight, so it smells like outside and possibilities, socks turned inside out, because you are not made of laundry money. You stretch until your spine agrees to be a colleague. You set your hat so it keeps your face the way a good friend does, honestly. Some days you are briefly rich. The path slants through a hill town where someone mended a Roman conduit, and water still arrives with an opinion about engineering. The fountain's lions surprise themselves every time a jet shoots from their mouths. Children learn arithmetic with ladles. A dog studies hydraulics with its entire body. You buy a wash bowl from a potter, hand-sized, rough-glazed. Clearly a bowl that will crack if you treat it like a hero, and for a moment you own a private sea. You pour, you splash, you become a small portable weather system. You discover that even expensive soap economies exist. Olive oil Castile, creamy, faintly smug, lives in small squares in little boxes, and costs the kind of money you feel when you count it. You barter for a sliver with a story and a copper. You save it for days you'll meet people you want to impress, toll keepers, destiny. On normal days you use the ashen tallow cake that works harder than it smells good. If your hands smell like kitchen and wood smoke, and the lemon you once met in a market 50 miles back, you count it a win. There are taboos and permissions. Some parishes post little signs in the language of carved symbols, the picture and the crossed out shirt you've learned, but also a fish here, meaning yes, clean your catch, but scale it elsewhere. In back lanes you pass half-legal laundries, with barrels that smell like complicated truth, lie, ash, sometimes the sharp tang of stale urine, which fullers use to persuade grease to let go. You take your socks very far from that. You do, however, remember the trick of horsetail grass, rough as a cat's tongue. It polishes pots and in a pinch it will lift road from knuckles without prosecuting the skin. Toward evening again, the road teaches scarcity. A hamlet's well has run low, and you read it in the silence, a cue made of patience rather than chatter, buckets set down with reverence, the crank turned like a prayer wheel. You don't take more than a ladle, you pour it over your fingers and rub it in like a promise not to be careless. You dress your boots with a thumb of grease because dry boots aren't clean, they're loyal. You sit on the well lip, and learn how to spend your sweat wisely, walk in the shade when the hedges allow, loosen the strap that picks fights with your shoulder, and accept that today's bath might be mostly a conversation between your skin and a breeze. There's the question of winter, and you ask it out loud to no one. How do you wash when water doesn't feel like a friend? The answer arrives as campfire gossip from an older traveler. Heat rocks, pour a little water over them in a tent, and call it ingenuity. Snow can clean a face if you convince your face to see the humor in it. A brisk dry scrub with a rough cloth will lift a day's salt the way a brush lifts crumbs from a table. You add to the notebook in your head, save tiny luxuries for cold days. One kettle poured into a bowl can be the difference between despair and a credible impression of civilization. Mainstream historical fact clears its throat. Many records, household guides, city ordinances, traveler notes show that ordinary people washed more than the stereotype admits. Linen shifts changed often, and linen's habit of laundering is half the secret of medieval cleanliness. Quirky tidbit waves a flea comb carved with tiny dogs. A quick pass by firelight can turn a long evening into an entomological mercy. Historians still argue whether fear of bathing during plague years truly stopped people from washing, or whether it mostly stopped people from bragging about it in writing, all while linen kept quietly doing what linen does. You end the week at a monastery guest hall. The porter shows you a basin, offers a towel with the solemnity of a sacrament, and leaves you to reacquaint your face with dignity. The water is just warm enough to encourage ambition. You wash without hurry because the walls are old and clearly on your side. You think about how much of travel is choreography. Offer, accept, step aside, pour, pass, thank, splash, smile, don't hog the sunny spot. You think about the kindness of basins and the patience of towels. Before sleep you inventory 5 little victories. You kept your socks from becoming a diplomatic incident. You impressed a goose with your line etiquette. You did not drop the soap into a river deeper than your self-esteem. You found a basin and founded a republic. You remembered to return the inn's wooden plug, averting both comedy and tragedy. Light joke 4. You award yourself the Order of the Clean Spoon First Class, with sprig of mint. And as you close your eyes, cleaner than you started, you notice that the mind does what water does. It settles. The heavy things sink, the bright things float. You are a traveler, yes, but also a person who has learned where ordinary people wash, where the world offers water and where people offer care. Tomorrow there will be another stream, another fountain, another borrowed tub, and if fortune is truly in a mood, an honest rain at exactly the moment your eyebrows need it. You tuck that certainty under your cheek like a cool stone, and sleep arrives with the quiet authority of water finding its level. You leave the inn road early next morning, drawn by the hush of a mill pond held behind a wooden breastwork. The surface is a polished coin, stamped with moving clouds. A signboard, carved and weather dark, tells the rules in a kindly but unarguable hand. Draw upstream for drinking, wash only below the sluice, no skins, no dyes, no flinging suds where the wheel drinks. You nod. Civilization is sometimes nothing more than an arrow painted away from a water intake. You kneel in the posted zone, rinse out last night's cloth, and squeeze it dry with the patience of a priest wringing out a miracle. Sand under your palms scours without judging. Geese supervise, again because geese are the municipal police of everywhere. Mainstream historical fact strolls up with its ledger. Many towns and manors in Europe issued ordinances about where washing could happen. Hides, dyers, and laundries were pushed downstream from where people drew drinking water, and fines met those who made the water sick. Quirky tidbit brings you a green sprig, soapwort, Saponaria officinalis, foams when you crush it and swish. Travelers who know hedgerows, know it as bouncing bet, a plant that washes wool and dignity in equal measure. Historians still argue whether such bylaws kept people actually cleaner, or merely made officials feel cleaner about writing them down. Enforcement lived and died with the bailiff's mood, and everybody's thirst. By midday the road widens to receive a caravan, and with it a square with a sun-bitten kiosk whose stone belly gives water. A boy dips a brass cup that hangs from a chain as naturally as a bell. He hands it to you with the politeness people reserve for thirst. You drink and then pour a thin run over your wrists. Nearby, a row of ewers and basins waits beneath a lintel where shade collects. You follow the choreography you've learned in a dozen markets. Pour a little, wash without splashing, tip the remainder onto the baked ground where it turns dust into dark petals. A woman refills the ewers from a cool room, and tells you the story of the place. A pious merchant endowed the fountain so that travelers might meet both God and their own reflection. Mainstream fact clears its throat in a second language. Across the eastern Mediterranean, and deep into Ottoman streets, Sebels, endowed public fountains, gave free water to passers-by, as a charitable act under WAQF law. Some even offered cups chained in place so no one went without a vessel. Quirky tidbit smirks. The cup chains sometimes outlasted dynasties, so you might drink today from a handle a pilgrim held 400 years ago. Historians still argue whether travelers routinely washed at these Sebels beyond the sip. Sources praise the giving of water far more than the rinsing of necks, but your wrists, now cooled and speaking kindly of the gesture, cast their vote. The trail leans toward the coast for an afternoon, and you meet the sea like an old friend who still gives 2 strong hugs. Salt stings and blesses. You learn the sailor's economy. Bathe in sea, rinse in fresh if you can. If you can't, let wind do work on salt. Sand is an abrasive with opinions. You borrow a handful and sand away the day from heels and palms, discovering that cleanliness sometimes arrives disguised as geology. You keep soap away from tide pools because the tiny citizens there have their own chemical constitution, and you would like to remain on speaking terms with shrimps. Evening brings cold, and with cold comes a different grammar of washing. A farm wife shows you the trick with heated stones. Lift them from the fire with tongs, lay them in an empty bucket, drape a damp cloth over the mouth, and crouch above the hole of fragrant steam like a scholar over a library lamp. Your paws listen. You scrub with a rough weave, the sort of linen that laughs at stains and then outlives them. Light joke 5. You knight your soap sliver, Sir Slippery of the round tub, then immediately misplace him in a fold of cloth, an appointment he keeps with every traveller since soap was invented. Mainstream fact opens a door to weathered timber and a breath of birch in the north. Saunas and banyas offered heat, steam and scraping. Travelers could be reborn between a stove and a bucket, then tumble into snow or a cold pond with the grace of a person who wants to feel all the verbs at once. Quirky tidbit: waves a leafy switch, birch whisks, the venic, lightly flog skin until you glow like a sermon. Historians still argue whether itinerant strangers were often admitted to village saunas, or whether such heat was a family covenant. The travel accounts tilt both ways, which is to say, sometimes you are invited, sometimes you are waved toward the yard with a bucket and a wish. Days stack. Your bag grows a private apothecary of small salvations, a twist of salt, a lump of alum that tightens skin and quiets nicks, a corked vial of rosemary steeped in vinegar, which dabbed on a cloth, insists on honesty from odors. You keep a needle and spare buttons because cleanliness isn't only smell, it's the confidence of a shirt that closes where shirts should. You learn to air garments at noon, when sun is a disinfectant with a cheerful bedside manner. You learn with a humility you could bottle, that dry is sometimes a more realistic cousin of clean. You stop at a smithy, where the trough is full of dark honest water. The smith nods you toward the far end, the end without the filings, and you rinse your forearms there, watching oil swirl into tiny weather maps. A traveling peddler arrives with an inventory that smells like a chest: pins, ribbons, a comb of bone, and penny soap pressed with a clumsy rose. You trade a story and a copper. The rose soap is proud but modest in action. It grants you the illusion that roses once believed in your shirt. You accept illusions, they cost less than miracles, and last longer than grumbling. On a wet noon, the road detours through a cloister orchard. An old monk sits by a barrel catching rainwater from a lead spout shaped like a dragon. He gestures you closer, as if you might otherwise miss the point of a barrel. The water is chill, and tastes of heaven and roof. He offers a wooden dipper. You wash without drama, and he offers with the beneficence of a man who has watched centuries practice the same mistake. The advice that you always wash where the barrel overflows, never in the barrel itself. You nod. Monks do not invent water etiquette, they simply write it down where the rest of us can borrow it. Mainstream fact steps through the orchard gate. Monastic houses often had lavabos, stone basins for ritual and practical washing, close to refectories. Guests did as the brothers did, cleaning hands before bread. Quirky tidbit shows a carved spout shaped like a fish whose mouth never closed in 800 winters. Historians still argue whether the ritual of hand-washing in such houses mapped onto broader daily cleanliness, or whether it stayed in its liturgical lane. The archaeology of drains says yes, while the surviving rulebooks mostly say don't splash. One grimy evening, you resort to ash paste. A pinch from the hearth mixed with a little water makes a grey smear that lifts grease from a pot, and from fingers alike. You work it over your knuckles, then rinse in a little, then dry by the fire until your hands feel like hands again, instead of tools with opinions. You rub tallow into your boots and call it both hygiene and future-proofing. You tell yourself, not even dishonestly, that care for objects is care for skin. A well-kept strap makes fewer bruises, and fewer bruises demand less commentary from soap. You pass through a market, where a perfumer, all bottles and promises, tries to sell you a pomander, an orange bristling with cloves, a portable constellation to carry through plague and gossip. You sniff, you sigh, it is 3 times your budget and 5 times your need. You buy instead a pinch of lavender, which you crush into your shirt like a note recommending you to anyone who gets close enough to read it. Mainstream fact puts on a mask with ties. Early modern folks leaned on scents and vinegars as much as on water, especially when they believed disease rode miasmas. Quirky tidbit: whispers, 4 thieves vinegar, a legendary blend of herbs and audacity, promised safety to those robbing the plague dead. The story survives because it perfumes the facts so well. Historians still argue whether such recipes were used as described or mostly lived in the pleasing corners of imagination, where fear sends its scouts. A week later you share a road with soldiers and learn the canteen bath. A trickle for face, a trickle for the best parts, a trickle to tease dust out of a shirt's neck, then a hand across your hair with water, so stingy it should be taxed. The sergeant enforces a rule you wish the whole world followed. The first pour is for mud, the second is for you, the third if any is for the ground, not back into the bottle. You sleep that night against your pack, smelling faintly of carded wool and discipline. You reach a port and spend an hour staring at barrels because barrels, like certain people, are better when full.
Sailors swap law. If you must wash at sea, lash yourself to the ship first. If you must launder, use sea for the beating and sky for the drying. If rain comes, strip fast, because fresh water on deck is a tax-free holiday. You watch three men turn a squall into a comedy of rinsing and regret. You consider joining, and then remember your relationship with slippery timbers. Dignity is the dry state between two bad decisions. When the weather turns cruel again, you make a tiny steam in your blanket tent pebbles, heated and tucked into an iron pot, a splash over stones, and your face in the rising cloud. It is a humble hammam for one, smelling of metal, and the poem of wet wool. You comb your hair, and the teeth sing like a saw across a clean board. You check your shirt seams by lantern and find them willing to last another town. You slip into sleep with the feeling of being restored rather than remade. By now your body has learned the calendar of washing the way your feet learn a road, by repetition until knowledge goes quiet. Stream at dawn, fountain at noon, borrowed basin in the afternoon shadow, rain whenever sky remembers you exist. You think with gratitude of the people who tied cups to chains and set tubs in corners and hung towels to dry, where strangers might borrow the edge. You promise, in the cathedral of your own intentions, that when you have a yard of your own you will hammer a peg for a basin and set a bucket to catching rain, and you will never say not for you to a dusty face. And as the late light slides off the fields, and you find once more the honest loft of straw above the steady choir of animals, you do the last small wash of the day, a wet palm across eyelids and lips, a gentle rub where strap meets shoulder, a quick blessing over the hands that touched bread. You fold your cloth and spread it where air will teach it tomorrow's freshness. Your skin hums low and content, the way a river hums under ice. Clean is not perfection, never was, but a truce you renew wherever water allows and people are kind. You tuck your hands under your cheek, and drift with the easy conviction that in the morning there will be a basin somewhere, or a spring, or rain, or simply a breeze and a little patience, and you will make do, as ordinary travelers have always done, with grace and a few good tricks.